Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to at least two of the long-awaited end-of-the-year lists for 2022. I know we're in the beginning of the new year of 2023, and normally I would do these at least in December, pretty much the end of the month for at least the year, whatever, so I didn't get to do this in 2022 because of a whole lot of things, coming up and so on. So instead, I felt it'd be more reasonable to do this in the beginning of 2023. At least, normally at least January should at least be the cutoff for whenever I do these end of the year lists. So finally, here I am with two of my end of the year lists. And this right now, this one, since, again, like I said, I got two. This one right here is going to be focused on so far, the rock albums that I've listened to this year. So this is all focused on the more non-metal stuff that just doesn't quite make any of the metal lists, just stuff that I don't think was heavy enough, or I don't know, that's actually not very good to say. It's stuff that doesn't really come close to what I would consider heavy metal, even though there's at least a couple of albums within this list that probably wouldn't have been too fine, that would have been fine on my end of the year list, for my favorite metal albums. However, for the most part, this is relatively still more closer to the realms of hard rock and so on. So without further ado, let me get into the honorable mention for this one. Because again, I've got 5 albums here. I've listed 5 albums, but there's at least one album here that I just didn't think was, good enough to be in my top 5. But it was still an album that I somewhat enjoyed. And the one that I am alluding to here is the newest album from Sammy Hagar and The Circle. That is Crazy Times. Yeah. I'm going to be honest with you. I loved Space Between, again, from 2019. I thought that was a really good album. Probably some of the best stuff I think I had ever heard from Sammy Hagar since some of his stuff he had released in the early to at least maybe mid-80s. I think it was a really good album. When this came out, again, this was about several months ago or so, a few months ago, I was kind of hesitant on whether or not it'd be better or just as good, as Space Between. So I had picked it up anyways from Target. So this is the Target copy that's got 2 extra tracks. I like this album. However, this is just one of those albums that's kind of been taking quite a while for me to really kind of adjust to. Because, again, when I first heard Space Between, it was right that. Just snap. I got into it so quickly. It was just such a great album from beginning to end. Again, one of the most solid albums I think I had heard from Sammy Hagar since some of his earlier stuff. From the early 80s at least. This one, it's definitely more different. I mean, there's a little bit of that same vibe, but I think because of the fact that this was recorded during the whole COVID lockdown and all of that, I think all of the atmosphere and the really dark and somewhat murky atmosphere of that whole bullshit COVID-19 and all of that, I think it really kind of it sure added to the atmosphere of this album. So in a way, it kind of takes away the sort of fun, almost feel-good vibes of Space Between had. So that's why it's kind of taken me a bit more time to actually get into Crazy Times here from Sammy Hagar and The Circle. It's still a fine album, but it's just still, I don't think it's nearly as good as Space Between. But again, I liked it. So there you go. Don't want to spend too much time on that. I need to get into the real meat of the matter, but I just wanted to mention this as a honorable mention. So there it is. Crazy Times from Sammy Hagar and The Circle. We'll put this over there. Okay, let's get into the real top 5 of this video. So coming in at number 5, since already it's in front of me, is this album here from Funeral Sex out of Brazil. They are definitely more of a gothic tinge stoner rock band. This is their debut album titled The Gods Put the Demons on Earth. I believe that's what it's titled. Yeah, The Gods Put the Demons on Earth. This was sent to me via Paul of Doomsay's Today Records, and one of the first packages I've received from him in practically a year, it seemed. And he sent this to me. This was a brand new release from early this year, I think January or February, I believe. But when I got this, man, I was actually kind of blown away by this. I mean, whenever I think of stoner rock, normally the stereotypical perspective of stoner rock is always, oh yeah, they sing about getting stoned, via marijuana and shit like that, because of it's all inspired by Sweet Leaf from Black Sabbath. However, I think that is just a really overblown stereotype, because stoner to me doesn't always quite mean the lyrics. For the most part, it tends to really mean the overall vibe of the music itself, like the tone from the guitars and everything. It's got more of a different dirgy, sort of not quite sludgy, but it's just different compared to than your typical sort of doom metal sound or whatever. I know there's plenty of stoner metal that would be like High on Fire and The Sword, but this to me is definitely straight up stoner rock. I definitely get some Alice in Chains and Soundgarden vibes from this album, especially in comparison to the previous 2 releases, like their EP and the very first full-length album, which I've got right next to me here. Let's see where it is. There it is. Which is this right here. This is their debut full-length album, which this was also sent to me from Paul of Doomsday's Today Records. Compared to this one's a way more darker, more grimmer, more brooding, but it just has such a unique vibe to it that I just latched onto. And again, it just sounds like a more gothic Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. And knowing me, I love those 2 bands. They are definitely my personal favorites to ever come out of that Seattle grunge era movement, whatever, from the late 80s to early 90s. They were definitely 2 of my favorites, and I think for the most part, they tend to be almost everyone else's favorites, because it was just the 2 easiest bands to get into, and that's what some of this just reminds me of. And I can hear a little bit of Danzig, too, as well in their sound. I know because of the gothic vibes, not so much vocally, but just some of the themes and stuff. Still, this was a really good debut album, and I definitely I'm looking forward to more stuff from this band. So that's pretty much here at number 5. So Funeral Sex with The Gods Put the Demons on Earth. All right, so here we go back to my sheet here, actually, since this is where I've got everything listed instead of just looking everything at, since I'm actually recording this on my phone, and right now I don't want to just be on the internet, so it's just better to print your list out instead of just looking at it. And since I got a microphone, everything being in the way, so it'd be much more difficult. So that's why I've got the sheet here. All right, so I just digressing and everything. Number 4 here is Reckless Souls from Norway with their debut full-length album titled Timeless. Again, this was sent to me via the band, via my NastyMetalProductions at gmail.com account. And they obviously contacted me on possibly reviewing this album on the channel. And that's what I did. And what I got was, it's definitely a hard rock album, but it's a hard rock album that mixes in some modern southern tinges to it, but also some modern punk vibes as well. Some punk influences is definitely heard in this album. It's a really interesting mixture of the sort of good, at least modern hard rock style, but yet combined with some of that modern southern rock vibe that might be inspired from the classic southern rock bands of years gone by, you know, like Lynyrd Skynyrd and the Allman Brothers Band and so on, but also combining some even punk as well in there. And it's a really interesting mixture. And it's one of the things that just really grabbed at me when I first was listening to this album. And that's the one thing I really got from it. And it's something I've never really heard done before. And I don't know if I'll ever hear anyone else do it again afterwards. But this could be a sleeper release for, I think, modern rock fans. And it's probably going to be one of those albums that will catch on much later on. And it'll be a sound that might end up being maybe more advent within this decade, probably, or maybe by the beginning of the next decade, because it's just a very interesting mixture, and I think it's what actually kind of sets this album apart from anything else I had ever heard this year. And I think it just made it a really interesting listen. So right now, that's sitting here at the number 4 position in my list. So definitely solid album. I'll leave a link again to their Bandcamp page where you can at least check this out and give it a listen for yourself. So there it is. Okay, now coming in number 3, since already I don't need to really look at my list to actually tell what are my next 3 listings here in my top 5 list here. So coming in number 3 is the newest album from Thundermother. It is Black and Gold. Released through AFM Records. This was a band I actually caught live, them opening up for Scorpions at the Save Mart Center in early October. And again, I did a video where I pretty much gave my thoughts about that whole entire concert. And again, I showed footage from them. It was really cool. So, and this was actually my first time really actually just listening to an entire album from Thundermother. Again, they are from Sweden, all female hard rock band. All I know is that this album really took me by surprise. This was a really solid hard rock album. I can hear plenty of vibes from AC/DC. I can hear plenty of influences at times even from Scorpions and maybe even early Def Leppard, the new wave of British heavy metal era, like On Through the Night and High and Dry and that sort of classic. You know, I can hear plenty of that. And a little bit of Girl School, all of that type of style. It's all packed into this album. Some great ballads, some great writing. It's just rich within melodies and harmonies and just so much of that. And it's just, and Guernica's voice is just so powerful and just a lot of great riffs and it's just great. So all of that stuff is just so good on this album, and I really just enjoyed this quite a bit, so I don't need to say too much because I've already done a review on it, but this was such a good album, and I think a solid output. This may be their most accessible, their most polished album to date compared to what at least I have heard previously from them, at least given after listening to this album. But it's definitely still a very cool album from these badass women. So that's all I really got to say about this. This was a really solid album from start to finish. So there we go. This was at the number 3 position. So Black and Gold from Thundermother. Now, speaking of Scorpions, this is at the number 2 position. It is their brand new album from early in 2022. That is Rock Believer. This is their debut, of course, for new drummer, or not quite new drummer to this world, Mickey D, drumming for bands like King Diamond and Don Dokken, and of course the late Motorhead, which the band he had been playing in pretty much up until Lemmy's passing in 2015. But this was that's the first real album from his camp since Bad Magic in 2015. As far as the Scorpions album here is concerned, as far as the sound and the vibe of it, compared to some of the previous ones I've listened to from Scorpions, this one might have been the most played Scorpions album of any of the ones since the ones I've had in my collection, because I never really completely went further into the 90s period. I never even went further into the 2000s. Only thing I've just went into as far as past like Face the Heat was Sting of the Tail, and that covers album was a Come Black or something in it, and Return to Forever. And I think this album is a much better album than any of those. And I know that may not always be a well-found opinion, but that's just been mine. And I think this was a pretty solid album. No, this is not going to dethrone any of the classics, whether it be the Uli John Roth era or even some of the earlier ones from the late 70s into the early 80s. I mean, Love Drive up to possibly Love at First Sting or something. It's probably not going to dethrone any of those classics, but as far as a modern day Scorpions album, this I thought was a really solid return album for them, and a lot of great rockers on here, some stuff that actually does kind of border on some of their heaviest material since such and such. But man, this was a really solid album. It's one that I've listened to quite a bit in 2022. It was a really good album from beginning to end, and it was a really nice thing to at least have a brand new Scorpions album that I can listen to without probably really pushing the skip button. Really, that's just personally me. I mean, sure, not everything on here is perfect, but as far as a modern day Scorpions album, this I thought was pretty solid from beginning to end. So there you go. I just listened to this album a lot. And of course there I've got the ticket when I saw them at the Save Mart Center here in Fresno. So yeah, just solid stuff. And the second disc, I think even the bonus material on the second disc are just as good, if not maybe even better than some of the material on the first disc. But I just listened to this album so much that it's why it's pretty high in my top 5 rock albums of 2022. So, and this almost could have been in my top 20 metal albums of 2022, but honestly, there were so many good metal albums for me that this was kind of taking a back seat. So I felt in order to kind of do this album, I feel, justice, I need to kind of put this in the top 5 rock albums, because it still is a hard rock album, but it's definitely on the heavier spectrum when it comes to hard rock. Just a really solid album from beginning to end. It's one that I just loved from the first time I actually listened to it. So there you go. That was at number 2, Rock Believer from Scorpions. Finally, at my number 1 slot, even though I didn't have this one as long as Rock Believer, but I sure gave it enough spins, probably just as much as the spins that I gave Rock Believer. But the album that I'm talking about is the debut album from Rick Ventura's Riot Act, Closer to the Flame. And this is another band that I caught live early this year. They were opening up for Raven since they were touring with them. That's where I got the shirt from. I know this was formed by Rick Ventura and Lou Cavaras. However, Lou Cavaras had passed away due to COVID-19 symptoms in 2020. And so this has just been Rick Ventura's band. And again, it's got that classic Riot sound. Again, sound that you probably would have heard on like Rock City up to about possibly Restless Breed, really. And it's just a really good album that I think pays tribute to that period, but also I think kind of forges itself a new path for a brand new period is something new for Rick Ventura to really venture onto and expand on. And that's what I got from this album. And it's like, well, it's got some of that classic vibes. It also has a little bit of something that's different. Something that if that period of Riot had continued on, this is actually what it would have sounded like in maybe the 90s or even into the 2000s. This is probably the sound that we'd be hearing from Riot right now if Mark Rowley hadn't passed away, and if Rick Ventura was, if that original band had not split up, this kind of would have been that sound. And so it's kind of a really interesting mixture of like Fire Down Under and Restless Breed and even at times Narita and Rock City. It's just a blend of all that with also a little bit of some modern tinges here and there. And it's just really interesting, and I just really love the sound from beginning to end. This was such a solid album. What a great album they put together here. I mean, this really ended up being probably my absolute favorite hard rock album, or just rock album in general, from 2022. It's just so catchy, so much hooks, so much melodies, so much power. Because even from like the singer here, Don Chaffin, or Don Chafin, whatever, I think it's Chaffin is how you pronounce it. A great voice. Oh my God. Apparently he used to sing in a thrash metal band called Red Shark, I think they were titled. Or was it not? Something. I don't think that was the name of the band. I just forgot the name of what they were called. But it was Red something. And it's just crazy that he actually had sang a thrash metal band, because his voice is just so smooth, so melodic, and so big, and it just works. He's probably, I think, the best of both worlds when it comes to the power and the charisma of Guy Speranza, and at times even the power of someone like Tony Moore. He's got that same vibe. It's like a combination of both those singers. And he just nails some of these classic rock leanings of some of these songs. It's just, there's even some funk here and there thrown in. Some old school blues, some British stuff that I can even make comparisons to early sort of heavy proto-metal bands from Britain in the early 70s. It's really good throwback to that great period of 70s hard rock. What a great album. So this was my number one album of 2022 for when it comes to the realms of hard rock. What a fantastic album from beginning to end. So, and it's not just so much based off the second disc, because the second disc is pretty much just feels more like bonus material. It's all re-recorded stuff from everything from Rock City up to at least Fire Down Under. But there's just some great, it's just, the album itself, the original album, everything, from the title track up to about Rock, Love, and Roll on that first disc here. This is what makes my number one list. It's just such a good album. So there you go, folks. There's my top 5 rock albums of 2022. If you have any thoughts on any of these albums, or if you have your list, I'm very curious on what are your top favorite albums of when it comes to rock of 2022. So if you have at least a favorite rock albums of 2022, or if you have any sort of comments on either ones I showed, you can leave them in the comments section below. But if you have never listened to some of these albums, go check these out. These are all very well worth it. So with that, I'll be back here soon with my top 20 metal albums of 2022. So with that, I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.